Morning guys, today I'm going to be talking about the bow drill fire method. I learned this method for survival purposes, and I hope this video is going to provide some information for you to get you over that hurdle and start building some fires. I just want to say before we get started that practicing in the backyard is completely different than going out into the wilderness and finding these materials to make fire. All these pieces here, I know where they come from. They're all nice and dry. So make sure you practice in the backyard first before you go out in the woods. And a whole book could be written on the bow drill fire method, but I want to keep this video fairly short. So I'm just going to show you what's been working for me. There are 4 components or pieces to the bow drill set. I believe they're all equally important. You have your drill, sometimes called a spindle. You have your fireboard or hearthboard. You have your bearing block, sometimes called a handhold. And you have the bow itself. All these pieces have to have certain qualities for this to work. There's a lot of different variables, including weather, physical ability, your bird's nest. And using the bow drill is very exhausting, so you only want to do this maybe once or twice. So to keep this video hopefully very simple, I decided to just go through all the qualities that each of these pieces have to have for this to work. And we're going to start with the drill first. The drill needs to be dry and non-resinous wood. Obviously wet wood's not going to work, and if you pick a wood that has resin in it like pine or spruce, the resin will actually act as a lubricant, and we want friction here, not something lubricated. I like my drill to be a little thicker than my thumb. If it's too thin, it's not going to ride on the bow very well. It might break, and if it's really thick, it's going to be heavy and awkward to use. I prefer my drill to be between 10 and 20 inches long. I know 20 inches seems rather long, and it's kind of hard to find a piece this straight, but if it's too short, say something like this, you're going to be hunched over. It's really hard to breathe, very exhausting. So the longer the better. You can stand in a more upright position, allowing you to breathe. The piece needs to be straight. You know, using something like this is not going to turn very well, so you want it to be as straight as possible. You want it to be round, otherwise it won't spin. You want the piece of wood to be smooth but not polished. If it's polished, it's going to slip on your bow. And say this had bark on it, that's a bit too rough and probably going to cut up your rope. You want it to be rounded at one end. You want maximum contact with your fireboard. This is all about friction, and when it's nicely rounded, you're going to have maximum contact, maximum friction. And on the other end, you want it to be pointed. This is the end that's going to be in contact with your bearing block, and you want minimal friction here. So that's just the drill itself. Next up, we have the fireboard. It needs to be dry, non-resinous wood. I prefer a softwood, and using a hardwood for my drill. It needs to be fairly straight. You don't want it rocking while you're using it. I like it to be just long enough to comfortably rest my foot on it. I prefer 3/4 of an inch thick, roughly. And because this is a soft wood, every time I use this hole is going to be getting deeper and deeper, and eventually going right through the board. So 3/4 of an inch thick. I like the center of the hole to be about 1 inch from the edge of the board. If it's too close to the edge, once you make your V-notch, there's a good chance your drill is going to be popping out of the hole. I prefer my board to be between 2 and 4 inches wide. Your V-notch I like to be about a 35 to 40 degree angle from center. The V needs to be clean and free of any debris. You want your notch, you don't want it to go too deep into your hole. I prefer about a third of the way. If it goes too deep into your hole, you're going to lose a lot of friction that way. And that's pretty much it for the Fireboard. These two pieces are the most complicated and have the most variables. Next up we have the bow. It can be made from green or dry wood, but I prefer dry. Green will have too much flex to it. I like mine to be thumb thickness. If it's too thin, it's going to break, and too thick, it's going to be too heavy and awkward to use. I prefer it bowed like this, but you can use straight. Some people actually prefer the bow to be straight itself. The length is from my armpit about to my fingertip roughly. It's going to provide enough length so you have nice smooth strokes. If it's too short, you're going to be doing these little tiny strokes. I like it to be notched at both ends so your rope isn't going to slide. I prefer paracord. This is going to last a really long time, and once you get used to the paracord, I recommend going to natural cordage, giving that a try. But this one piece of cord, I've used this bow over 100 times and it's still in good condition. As far as the cord tension, you can see without a drill in there, it's fairly loose. And the wrap on this end, you don't have to be too particular about it. Just wrap it around a bunch of times and do a couple of clove hitches or overhand knots. Will work just great. And when you're using the bow, I like to hold onto the end that it's tied onto. Next we have a bearing block or handhold. This one is made out of deer bone with a metal insert. Your bearing block could be made out of a bunch of different materials. Bone, stone, bottom of a pop can, stuff like that. Wood. I have a bearing block here made out of birch. You can see I actually went right through it just from lots of use. You can use wood, but you want your bearing block to be a harder wood than your drill. You can see here I have a pop can. The bottom of a pop can will work. It's not the greatest thing, but it might be the only thing you could find. I also have a lid from a tin that I've indented for the drill to sit in. And I also have a fan motor from a computer that spins really freely. And you can see I just spray painted mine a fluorescent orange. On my last hike, I lost this thing like 3 times. It took me 20 minutes to find it. And actually all these pieces, I put some fluorescent green tape on it. One thing I want to mention, that if you are using wood against wood, you're going to get some friction, and you might want to use some lubricant. A few things you can use for lubricant are green leaves. I've heard about people using earwax, lip balm, grease. No bow drill fire is going to be complete without a bird's nest. This is a dry material that you're going to put your ember into and ignite this and blow it into flame. I'm sure most of you are familiar with bird's nest already. I just want to quickly go over it. I have dry red pine needles. I have dry grass that's fairly compressed, but not compressed too tightly. I want a little bit of air to be getting in there. I also have, in the center of your bird's nest, you want your driest, most fibrous, fluffy material possible. So in the center, I have a bit of cattail fluff. That stuff's kind of a pain to work with. Fluffed up jute twine. fluff from thistle or dandelion. That'll work. So you can see I have a nicely worn hole. Right now I'm going to make one from scratch. Like I said earlier, about 1 inch from the edge of the board. I take the point of my knife and just get a hole started. And then I take my knife and angle it and start working it like so. Be aware of where your other hand is. You don't want to cut your hand in case it slips. So we have our hole here. You want to try to make it roughly the same size as your drill, best you can. You can see my drill here after I use it. It's got this hard black carbon on it. You want to scrape that off in between use. You can use sandpaper. So now that we have our hole ready, we have our drill nicely trimmed, what we want to do is work the board and match up this with your hole. You want it to fit really nicely for maximum friction. You'll notice that I haven't cut out my V-notch yet. That'll come after. As you can see how that hole is much wider now. Remember to trim off all the black in between each use. So now that it's matched up very well, we can make our V-notch. So now we're ready to get an ember started. One thing you want to have is something to catch your ember on. This is a piece of dry birch bark, but you could use anything thin and flat, leaf, piece of top of a tin can, something like that. Make sure everything's dry, the ground is dry, and you put your ember catcher into your notch there. I put my right foot onto the board, which is most comfortable for me. You want to make sure you keep all your different components dry. So what I do is I take the rounded end of my drill, making sure to hang on to this end that I wrapped. I like to have the drill to the outside of the bow. I like to have it roughly halfway up the drill. You can see that it's about halfway. I hold the bearing block firmly against my right leg. I try to keep the drill as vertical as possible, and I try to keep my bow as horizontal as possible. And sometimes I use my thumb to control the tension on the string. So you start off slow with very little pressure. You can control the pressure with your hand on the bearing block. Start off slow, light pressure, gradually building speed and adding pressure. We have an ember. You want to carefully lift up your fireboard You don't want to screw this up. There's been many times that I've gotten this far and screwed everything up because I make a mistake. You don't want to blow on this. I still make that mistake. You just kind of want to wave your hand. Make sure you have a nice cherry. Try to make sure I'm in frame this time.